Okay, so we're on Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, about the middle of the page. And again, just very quickly, we're off tangent on our main subject of dealing with the questions that we have regarding coins that aren't worth the values. Can you convert them into a kodesh? We're dealing for the next couple of weeks, a couple of blots, and we're in the middle with the subject of trumas of maasros, and what can you, especially Maser Sheni, and the halachas, somewhat the halachas of Maser Sheni, what you can do with it, and we've compared and contrasted with the Mishnah in Bikurim, where the Mishnah there compares truma and Bikurim on the one hand, the Kedusha of Truma and Bikurim with the Kedusha of Maser Sheni. So that's really what we've been discussing here. And moving on, we touched on a very interesting subject last week, and that is, we know, focusing on one of the distinctions that had to do with bittul. Everybody says batel barov, batel b'meya, batel b'shishim, all these bitulim that Chazal tell us. So we say that truma and bikurim can only be mevatel echad b'meya, meaning you have to have 1 in 100, so it has to be 101 with the truma, and then the truma can be nullified, can be mechalel, and a non-kohen can eat it. That's the only way one can eat truma, is batel b'meya. And in contrast, we said that the Mishnah says masha ein kein b'maser sheni, notwithstanding what Truma and Bikurim is, Maser Sheni is not like that. So we're in the Gemara now that is trying to understand, what does the Gemara mean when it says notwithstanding Maser Sheni? Is Maser Sheni more chumrah? Is it more kula? Is it more stringent, less stringent? So the Gemara tells us the logic is that it's less stringent, because when you look at that Mishnah in Bikurim, which we read a few weeks ago, we see that we have a lot of chumras, and we know those chumras don't apply to Maser Sheni. So if they don't apply to Maser Sheni, then clearly the question of bittul, of nullification, doesn't. And according to that, you can be batel Maser Sheni barov, meaning you have to have just 50 point something, 51%, let's say, of non-Maser Sheni, and then the Maser Sheni is mevatel. Why is that important? It's important because Maser Sheni, the owner of that Maser Sheni, is the one who's obligated to eat it in Yerushalayim. So if he's obligated, he's got to do everything he can to either bring it, or if it's going to spoil, to convert it into money and bring it over, and he has to eat it. His friends can't eat it. I mean, his family can, but it's part of his Shiur for Maser Sheni. So then it becomes important, if the Maser Sheni falls into a pot with other food, what can you do with it? If it's batel barov, then Rov will take away the Kedusha. But if it's not batel barov, then what's the story? Is it batel b'meya? What is it batel in? So the Gemara went back and forth, and I won't go over that part of it. But then the Gemara was machadish something else to us, which is really what we're into now. And the Gemara said, this whole Indian of bittul, very good. It's Chazal said there's such a thing as bittul, Rabbanan. Not midaraisa, it's Rabbanan. But the only time you can use this concept of bittul is if you cannot otherwise legitimately make it sort of available or proper in another way. In other words, davar sheyesh lo matirin is the concept, and the concept means if there is a way to make something, in other words, the way to make something permissible without nullification, you're not allowed to nullify. So this whole concept of batel barov goes away if there's a way of making that Maser Sheni, so to speak, palatable in Kedusha, or palatable to the owner. And once it's palatable, then if it falls into a pot, doesn't matter. The nullification doesn't help. It doesn't apply where something is palatable. So what are we really talking about? So for instance, if So if it falls into a pot and typically, that's it, then you say, okay, fine, now it's bottled. But if, for instance, if the Masa Sheni, let's see, for instance, if the Masa Sheni, you can somehow work it out that it can be eaten in Yerushalayim because of another factor. We're going to see that in the Gemara in a minute, what we're talking about, so we'll actually see it. Then falling into a mixture with non-Masa Sheni doesn't help, right? It doesn't help. And that's a very important concept. For instance, let me take the example of Rashi. So if you can redeem Masa Sheni, and take that money to Yerushalayim, then, and there are circumstances when you can and can't, we'll see in a minute, depending if it becomes Tameh or not becomes Tameh, then it doesn't help. Bittul doesn't help because you have another way of making that Masa Sheni edible, whether in its own form or through exchange of money. So there's no fallback to Bittul. Bittul only works when there's no other way of doing it. So we're going to review that Gemara in a minute and see what we're talking about. But so that concept is the concept that we're dealing with right now. So we're in the middle of the Gemara now. And who says this? This Chiddush is said by Chizkiah, and we quoted Chizkiah that Chizkiah says that for instance, if I have Masa Sheni and I am Podeh Masa Sheni, and then I have a little bit of Masa Sheni less than a pruta, we said that I forgot. It's in the field and I forgot it. So Chizkiah says, a novel Chiddush, that you can take that less than Sheva pruta and attach it to the redemption of the Masa Sheni that you already did on your field, because he takes the position that you never completely use up the coin, the money that you're exchanging for the Masa Sheni. There's always a little bit of room on the money. That's his concept. We'll see how that really works out in practicality. And since you have a little room on the coin, you're allowed to take the less than Sheva pruta, which is a minuscule amount, and say, I'm attaching it to that pruta that I already consecrated for the purposes of redeeming Masa Sheni, and I'm going to put it on that coin. That's an example of Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin. That's the Gemara's example of Davar Sheyesh Matirin. I can be matir. I can allow this Masa Sheni to be eaten in exchange for the fact that its value is now on this pruta, which I'm going to take to Yerushalayim and buy substitute food, and then I'm going to be eating that in Yerushalayim. And that's, of course, we've said that all the time, that's the way you do it, you exchange it. So if you can exchange it, then you can't be mavatal. Then if it happens to fall into a pot, that pot does not legitimize the Masa Sheni that fell in, even if it's a minuscule, less than a pruta, because you've already found a different way to consecrate it through redemption. So that's the idea of Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin, and that's Chizkiah's Chiddush. Now the Gemara again went back and forth the last couple of weeks, saying the halacha is like Chizkiah, it's not like Chizkiah. Here's an example why it is. Here's an example why it's not. So we've gone through that Shakla B'Tarya, and now we're up to the middle of the page where it says V'nisa masa de'islay v'nitzrafinu. In other words, the Gemara says that what we just said, that he should take the half a pruta that was already used, the half the shava pruta that was used for the previous, and let it put it on including the mixture, the food that's in the mixture, and that should go on the pruta. In other words, he's already lost that masa sheni fell into the pot, and now the question is there bittul because it's barov? So may he do that? Says the Gemara, you can't do it. Why? The oraisa rabbanon lo mitzarfin. In other words, if it fell into the pot, and now you want to say, wait a minute, we're not going to do bittul. We're going to attach it to the coin because the coin has room on it. Says the Gemara, the oraisa rabbanon lo mitzarfin. So you have something called bittul de oraisa and bittul de rabbanon. What's bittul de oraisa? Is purely taking the money and let's say, well, not bittul, but curing it with the rice is a better way of saying it, is by putting it on the coin. That's what the Torah says. The Torah says you can redeem it on a coin, and that's allowed. Comes the rabbis and says that there's another way of doing it, and that is through bittul. But you can't mix the two, because one is a d'oraisa, a Torah principle of putting it on the coin, and mixture and the food in the mixture is a rabbinic way of making it appropriate. And you can't take a doraisa and a dorabbanon; they don't fit. They're two different levels. The doraisa is one way of getting the master sheni to make it acceptable to a non owner, and the bittul is another way.
And why can't the bittul be upgraded into a deraisa?
Because bittul is never deraisa. Bittul is always derabanan. In other words, deraisa is no such thing as bittul. It's the rabbinic concept that, you know what, let's be mevatel it. Whether it's barov or b'meya or b'shishim, that's all a rabbinic concept.
But so for this case, it's just hard to strange.
No, you can't make exception. You want to make an exception in this one.
You're making it a chumrah. That's all. You're adding a chumrah to say something midrabanan will make it equivalent to a doraisa, and then we're done. Why can't we upgrade that way? Because even though it's bittul under the dorabanan, under the doraisa, it could be added.
No, so to oraisa, you're allowed to add. You're absolutely right. Mid oraisa, you can take the food that has been redeemed on the coin and the food in the pot and make it one. Mid oraisa, that's okay. It's the Rabbanan who said it's not okay. The Rabbanan come along and say once it falls into the mixture, and you can nullify it, you can no longer elevate it and put it into the same sort of, I'll say pot, but into the same universe as the dioraisa. So the rabbis, through their chumrah, said you can't mix the two. The Torah doesn't have a problem. And many times the Torah allows us to do something that the rabbis say no. Because the rabbis, in fact, that's because the rabbis are at a lower madrega. I mean, they're gedolim, but they're at a lower madrega. And they come along and they say, you know what? The Torah said it's okay, but we're not going to allow it. And that's what we call a siyag. That's what we call by different names. We say, no. We have to protect ourselves from doing something improper, even though the Torah says it's okay. So midoraisa, you're allowed to mix the two. Midorabanan, you're not allowed to mix the two. So says the Gemara, it's a doraisa and a rabbanan, and you can't mix the two. So you can't make it appropriate that way. Okay? So if that's the case, and you have the opportunity, there's the potential of redeeming, how is nullification okay? Remember, nullification, bittul, is only okay when there's no redemptive way of doing it. But if there is a redemptive way of doing it, like in this case, putting it onto the shava pruta, then you can't have bittul. Again, midorais, it's all okay because you can do it. But midrabanan, how is bittul allowed when you can't mix the two because one is deraisa and rabbanan, so the rabbis are in a quandary. You can't mix the two, but how are you allowed to have nullification in the first place if the redemptive way of doing it is still a possibility? So the rabbis have boxed themselves into a corner by saying it's not this and it's not that. It's not redemptive.
Are there other exceptions where the Rabbanan say no and the Deraisa says yes, that we don't follow the Rabbanan?
No, no, in Bisman Hazeh, we always follow the Rabbanan, and if the Rabbanan put a sort of a quash or a chumrah where the Torah allows a kula, then again, because of our stature, we say we follow the Rabbanan, that it becomes a chumrah. Even though you can justify in your own mind, but wait a minute, it's really okay. But Das Torah, you have the Das Chachamim. The Das Chachamim said in our time and in our present situation, we should not rely on the kula that the Torah allows us to. And again, there are good reasons sometimes, which the Gemara will explain, because sometimes if you allow it, then by allowing it, you may confuse someone to thinking that another parallel situation is okay, and that one's not okay midoraisa. So the rabbis have to look at through a different lens and say, we're protecting the klal, we're protecting everybody else, because in previous times they didn't worry about that confusion. Let's say in the times of Tanoim, Amoroim, and whatever. But if the rabbis came along and made a chumrah in their time, it was because that generation already allowed the possibility of confusion. And what's going to happen in later generations?
Yeah.
So they say, no, we're not going to allow it. Now, we can't roll back to pre-rabbinic edict because that's just not the way we operate. So we say, once a rabbinic edict was laid, that's the future follows that rabbinic edict. And remember, we have this also in the Gemara. Remember, the Gemara, it told us that when you look at one Tana and another Tana, whose opinion do you take? The answer is the latter Tana. You would think, oh, the former Tana was the Gadol, right? He was the early Tanoim. But the latter Tana came along and made a statement which already may have changed the equation, and that latter Tana was speaking to the time, right? His time. And once he speaks to his time, then we say, okay, going forward, we can't roll back the clock anymore to what the first Tana said. That's Beferish, that the Gemara tells us. So if that's the case, then halachically, we follow the Shulchan Aruch, we follow Choshen Mishpat, Yeridea, and all, and then comes along the Achronim, or the latter day Achronim, and they say, okay, the Yeridea says it's halacha, but it's a little nuanced. So we're going to interpret that nuance. And then you have the Gdolim, let's say, of our time or the previous generation, who put a little bit of a twist on what you read in the actual Shulchan Aruch, because that's the interpretation of the Shulchan Aruch. Now, if you're, I hate to say it, but I mean, there are people who will say, yeah, but that's their interpretation. I have my interpretation. That's a little bit of a
That's a stretch.
A stretch. Call it a nice way of saying it is a stretch. There are other ways of saying it. But the fact of the matter remains is that we have to follow our halacha, and the people who, in our generation, they had great poskim, right? Moshe, Rabbi, the Chazanish, others who put a certain twist on a halacha, which maybe if you look directly into the Yeridea, you would see a little bit of a difference. The joke was when especially in my time years ago, when a person got smicha, then he had Rav Moshe's number on the back of the certificate, so that when it came to halacha, he could turn it around and call Rav Moshe, so to speak. In other words, the reality is that many of our present day Rabbanim do rely on the psak of not only the Gedolim of past, but the Gedolim of present. We have big Gedolim in our time now who are poskim, who may see something a little bit of a different because of the times. Today, we're going to have AI and all the things that imagine what halacha might emerge from the fact that we have technology today that is a game changer from anything that we know al pi halacha, whether it comes to practical halacha on Shabbos or halacha of Taras Mishpacha. I mean, all these other things. Today we have people, women who can't have children, or families, couples who can't have children. You have Bonei Olam. You have all these other things that are innovative, and they have to follow halacha. You have to follow what the halacha allows, and sometimes if the halacha doesn't speak to it, you have to have a gadol to interpret what the halacha is saying about something that plainly is not in the Torah. It's not in the Gemara. It's not in Shulchan Aruch directly. and we have to extrapolate. What's
That
the
makes me
halacha?
it makes me wonder if is that you have an AI that's listening to everything and all. Could that but you're not like it's not like a voice activated light switch, we would say, most would say, would be prohibited. But what if it's an AI and you start talking and saying, oh, it's kind
It
of
would be
dark in
nice to
here?
have lights.
Right. Would an AI be able to say, oh,
Well, so the AI becomes the Shabbos goy, right?
right, right.
Well, it's not pure Aish also. A lot of the
The question then is, are all these things combined together? But it's you know anyway.
Right, right. So you're touching on again what we're talking about. That so here, on a very simple level, the Gemara is telling us the Oraisa is here, the Rabbanon is here, the twain shall never meet. Okay, so then now the Gemara asks the Kasha. Okay, let's go one step further. So if the Oraisa and the Rabbanon can't meet, let me give you a different example. What's the example? Venita demai. Let's talk about demai. What is demai? Demai is suffix whether or not someone gave, right, trumas amasas. In other words, it's not clearly tied. It's not clearly not tied. So because there's a suffix, and that's midrabanan, that's only midrabanan, then why can't you take demai?
The recording has reached the maximum length. To replay your message, press 1. To delete and re-record your message, press 3. For delivery options,
Jonathan, is that you?
set to fax, press 6.
Okay, so if we have demai, nun gimel amid aleph, nun gimel amid aleph. So if we have demai, if we have this suffix truma, suffix tied or not tied, and that's the rabbanan, then why? So that's our example. Let him combine that with the masa sheni that's in the mixture, which is batel barov, and let that be. So that mixture can work. You can put that together, and then if that you can actually say, okay, so we have an example where you can redeem. You're telling me I can't redeem the Masa Sheni because there is Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin, but in a case where you have something that isn't Matirin because it's Demai, it's Suffolk, then Bittel should help. So we have a way to be Mavatal what's in the mixture with Demai. And if that's the case, then you can certainly still paskin like Chizkiah, but here's an example where even Chizkiah would say, there is no matirin. So go with it. Again, the Gemara is going back and forth and trying to find whether we have to hold like Chizkiah or whether there's a way of taking Chizkiah out of the equation. So by constantly telling us that you can't mix a Darabanan and a Daraisa, that would show that Chizkiah then Chizkiah is wrong, because Chizkiah is saying that you can be mavatal. Why? Because the halacha is that Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin. We see an example here where Davar Sheyesh Lo Matirin doesn't apply, and still you can put the mixture together, and then this way you're mavatal Masa Sheni. So that's l'chayra should be a way to do it, and not impugn Chizkiah. Says the Gemara, no. Still, that can't be an appropriate way of doing it. Why? Dilma also la'asuya vadai. The reason why you can't use this as an example is what I said before. Because if you allow this, then someone might be confused and think you can do it with real Masa Sheni Midaraisa. Remember, I said before that sometimes we do things because we're saying that we're afraid that someone will take away from this and do something improper. This is a perfect example, because if we allow Demai and the mixture that has the Masa Sheni in it to be conglomerated, to bring them together and say that this is an example of where you can eat Masa Sheni because there's two Darabanans, then someone who's looking at it and says, oh, you took a regular food, regular Masa Sheni, meaning the Demai, and you made it okay by putting it together with the mixture, then if I find other Maser Sheni, I can also do the same thing, even though one is Demai, one is not Demai. But in the eyes of people who see it and don't understand the difference, that will become a Lifnei Iver. It'll become a Michshel, because they'll think, oh, sure, I can take regular Maser Sheni and put it together with the mixture, which again, Midorais is okay, but Midrabanan is not okay, and I'm okay. Teretz says no, that was Demai, and Demai is Suffolk. Suffolk you can put together with a Rabbanan. A Suffolk you can put together with a Rabbanan, but a Vadai, meaning an actual Vadai clean Maser Sheni, which would be Maser Sheni Midaraisa, that you can't put together with Rabbanan. But a person looking at it isn't going to see the difference. And he's going to say, oh, now I can take regular Maser Sheni, I can mix it, I can put it together with the mixture and make it okay for me to eat. And that's not the case. So that's the Gemara is telling us. Dilma osel asuya vadai. Because we're allowing Demai, he might mistake that and say that even if it's not Demai, it's actually Maser Sheni, Midaraisa, then you're allowed to do it. So therefore, that's not a good teretz, right? So now we're back to the question, according to Chizkiah, who says that if with a davar sheyesh lo matirin you can't use bittul, is there a way of using bittul? That's our objective here, is to find whether there's an exception that Chizkiah will allow the use of bittul and not insist, oh, there's a davar sheyesh lo matirin, therefore you can't be mevatel. So the Gemara went back and forth here and tried to say, yes, we can do it. And now, even with Demai, we can't do it because of the siyag, if you will, of making the mistake. If you allow Demai, then someone might think that regular, non-Demai, meaning regular Maser Sheni, it can be mevatel. And clearly you can't. Why? Because you can't mix a Deraisa and a Derabanan. And remember, Demai is Midrabanan, so that was the Havanin. Okay. So now the Gemara is going to come up with another novel approach. These are all novel approaches and how we can legitimize Chizkiah in light of the fact that there is a davar sheyesh lo matirin. Says the Gemara, v'nitna shtei prutos. Up until now, we're talking about redeeming with one pruta. In other words, you have Chizkiah's case was you have a pruta, and on that pruta you legitimize Maser Sheni, and there's some room left on that pruta. So what? You take a piece of wheat or fruit, whatever it was, that is less than a shava pruta, and you legitimize it by saying that pruta that I used before, I'm now going to put the kedusha of this less than shava pruta on that pruta, and I'll make it okay. And the Gemara says, no, you can't do that. Says the Gemara, v'nitna shtei prutas. How about if a person comes with two prutos, and what does he do? So he legitimizes the Maser Sheni in the field, and what does he do? He puts it not on one pruta, but on two prutas, but only utilizing 1.5. So let's a case. You have two prutas. On it, you can put 2 bushels. And he has 1.5 bushels, and it won't fit on one pruta, but it'll fit on 2 with a little left over. So that's what he'll do. He'll take 2 prutas worth. He'll redeem 1.5 bushels of the Maser Sheni on the 2 prutos. He will still have room on the second pruta. And then when you have this piece that fell that was never redeemed, oh, no problem. I have 1/2 pruta's worth, or it could be less or a little bit more. I have this room on the second pruta. Guess what? I'm putting this less than shava pruta onto the second pruta, and then everything is solved. And that's the way to legitimize. In other words, by putting it on 2 prutas. That's what the Gemara's kasha is. And then what does he do? He takes the Maser Sheni that fell into the mixture, right? And he doesn't have to be mevatel it because he still can redeem it on the second pruta. Again, this is an example to Chizkiah. What do? I want to be able to redeem it and not nullify. I have 2 prutas. I put 1.5 bushels on one. I have a half of a pruta left for the second, so I don't have to come on to bittul. Why do I have to come on to bittul to say I can eat it? Take that whatever's in the mixture, so to speak, and put it on the half a pruta, and now you've redeemed everything, and you can eat the Maser Sheni without worrying about bittul. And that's the point. You don't have to come on to bittul because they do the whole thing on a coin, and that's
Rabbi?
a negotiational matirin. And there you have
Rabbi?
it.
Well, but I don't understand. I don't understand what that extra coin does. You still end up with a question of, can you have half a coin of Dioraisa and half a coin of Dirabanan? What is having 1.5 coins Dioraisa and half Dirabanan versus half a coin Dioraisa and half Dirabanan? What is that? How does this add to the argument in favor of Fiskia, having the extra coin? That's what I'm missing.
Well, I can suggest something. It doesn't answer the Durabanan Deraisa thing. I'm totally, utterly confused about that. But conceptually, assuming it's all the same or close enough, the idea is that instead of saying arbitrarily, there must be a little bit left in this coin, we're starting off at a point where we say definitively, we know we've got a significant amount left on this coin that can be used, instead of making an assumption that, oh, yeah, there's probably a little bit left and we'll use it.
Okay, so what we're saying here, Yale, is that Chizkiah is not, I mean, he doesn't hold of the concept of mixture deraisa and Rabbanan. Before, when you had one coin and you wanted to put it on one coin, and we say that you can't put it because it's deraisa and Rabbanan, then okay. So we're trying to justify why you can use the mixture, because Chizkiah is not going to, his procedure won't work. Chizkiah himself doesn't hold of that chiluk between the Reis and Rabbanan. So in a way, from Chizkiah's standpoint, he can say that even on one coin it will work. He can say that. All right, but we're saying on one coin, when everything is relying on one coin, you can't do it. But when you're relying on 2 coins, Chizkiah says, now I don't have to worry about that, even though you're right, even though the second coin has Doraisa on it, and now I'm going to take food from the mixture, which is Rabbanan. But remember that Midoraisa, you can mix. It's the Rabbanan who say you can't mix. Torah, it's all okay. The rabbis made the Chumrah. So Chizkiah is going to follow that rule and say, I'm not worried about the Rabbanan. If I have room on that other coin, I'm going to allow it because Midoraisa you're allowed to do it. So he's pushing against the tide of this sort of halacha, or at least a strong minhag that Midoraisa and Rabbanan you can't mix. And he's saying that with 2 separate frutas, I give myself the wiggle room to say, even though your point is well taken, for those who hold against Midoraisa and Rabbanan, 2 coins also don't matter. And we're going to see that in a minute here, in the next line. In other words, this is still a Havamina. The Havamina is, let's make it better because we have 2 coins rather than 1. And on the second coin, you're going to make it better. So that's the Havamina. So let's quickly go to the next line. To your point, Yale, Umi sabras pruta mechza tafsa shtei prutos. Do you really think that redeeming it on 1.5 can make the 2 prutas okay? So is it basically your kasha? What kind of legal fiction are you now creating if you say you can't put it on 1 pruta? Now, the 1 pruta that has only Maser Sheni, Midaraisa, nobody argues. That's 100% okay. It's the second pruta that has a half a Midaraisa, and now you're going to put the Rabbanan on it. That second pruta is what is gonna give us the problem, not the whole thing, right? Because the first pruta is totally Maser Sheni Midaraisa. No one has a problem with that. So the kasha is, just because you're doing 2 prutas, do you think you've solved the problem? Tafsa shtei prutas. So can the two prutas do what one can't do? That's the Gemara's kasha. Okay, so the Gemara low. No, that can't be. Pruta tafsa pruta. If you redeem a pruta's worth of masa sheni, that makes that coin, that one pruta, the proper means of exchange. V'chatzi pruta loy tafsa. But using the second half of the second to redeem, that doesn't do it. So the Gemara actually says, no, I had a havamina it would, but you're right, Yale. You're an Amora, and we agree with you that chatzi pruta loy tafsa, that the second pruta, which we're using only half of, can't make the what's in the mixture legitimize it. The only way to do it is through bittul, because you can't put it back on the pruta. Why? Hari dahavale rabbanan v'deraisa rabbanan, for the same reason. So we had a havamina. Oh, we're gonna change the landscape and make two prutas. It'll be better than one pruta. Your kasha is the right kasha. How can you do that? What have you gained? The one pruta is okay, but what have you gained in the second pruta? Somehow we thought magically, if I put it on a second pruta, it'll legitimize the mixture. What's in the mixture? Says the Gemara, you can't do that. There's no magic, because you have two prutas to make it better than one pruta. And a deraisa and a rabbanon loy mitzdarfei. A deraisa and the rabbanon do not mix. Okay, so back to square one. Again, the kasha is in Chizkiah. So again, we're going back and forth. What does Chizkiah say here? If you have a davar sheish lamatirin, do we put that aside? Because there's no way, because of the deraisa and the rabbanon, there's no way of putting the mixtures together. So now the Gemara comes up with a novel approach, or we think it's a novel approach. Why? Forget about prutas. We were talking about a pruta or a second pruta. No, that doesn't work. How about v'nisne iser? Iser is a bigger coin. Pruta is a penny. Iser is a quarter. We're going to use an iser as our coin of redemption. Now, what does that do? So if he brings an iser and he puts masa sheni on the iser, then he can use. So somehow the deraisa rabbanan is going to go away here, right? Because if you use an iser, then what's in the mixture we're going to allow to put onto the iser coin, right? So let's think about that. So what does that do? What does that do? Because you have the larger coin and you've redeemed on the iser, and you have extra space on the iser to redeem, then somehow will that allow what's in the mixture to be redeemed on the iser, and therefore you don't have to come on to bittul. So your first question, Yale, is going to be, what difference does it make if it's an iser? It's deraisa d'Rabbanan. And once it's deraisa d'Rabbanan, it always remains deraisa d'Rabbanan, whether it's give me a shekel, give me a sela. What difference does it make if you're mixing a deraisa d'Rabbanan? Why is it significant? Mm-hmm. Why is it significant as to the size of the coin, right?
Shouldn't matter.
What?
It shouldn't matter the size.
It shouldn't matter the size, because deraisa d'Rabbanan overrides the size of the coin. So that's the Gemara's kasha, and the question is, let's look at Rashi, especially the first of the wide lines. Deraisa d'Rabbanan lo mitzdarfi, the toughest prutazu b'kedushas masa shama'arav min haTorah batel barov, because min haTorah you're allowed to have bittul barov, diksiv achirabim lahatos. So midoraisa we have no problem, because midoraisa you can mix what's in the mixture with what's not in the mixture. That we said was never a problem. But Rabbanan hu de'amrei, it's the rabbis who came along and said, hey, chadesh lo matirin, as long as you can be matir, as you can redeem, lo levitl, then you're not allowed to use nullification. So nullification doesn't work where you can be matir. Hilkach ein isa masa bezeh, Element Rabbanan. It's only the rabbis say that there's an Isser of Maser. Hilkach ein mitzaref. You can't you conglomerate. Imzeh litvos pidyono, to redeem his pigeon. You can't mix. Nimsa shova chatzi pruta shehepi nechol b'lochilol. Then it'll come out that the half of a pruta that you found in the field after you redeemed, if you eat it, you're going to violate an Issa D'Oraisa because it has not been deconsecrated. It hasn't been legitimized. Aval the Chizkiah, Mos Rishonos, Kvan Estofu. It was Chizkiah who went against the grain and said, no, I'm not worried about that. If I have room on the coin, I have room on the coin. I'm not worried about, oh, this is the Raisa, this is the Rabbanan. It's all okay. So Chizkiah's theory was the novel theory. All right. So, and that's why we kept asking these kashas back and forth. Okay. Now, Veniti Chatzi Shova Pruta the Masasheni Shel Demai, right? Halokeach Ma'ama Oretz. So, in other words, what was the Mai? Original Demai you bought from an Amma Oretz, and you don't know if the Amma Oretz gave Masa, right? Because an Amma Oretz may not. Okay. This Upijona Rabbanah the Raisa called Adam Ne'aman Alamasas. Again, the Torah was lenient. The Torah said that every Jew gives Truma Masa. It's the rabbis who said, wait a minute, there are people who are Amei Oretz. Do they really know? And can we rely on them? This is like eating without a hechsher. Can we rely without a mashgiach that you can eat? So can we rely on an Amei Oretz who harvested his field? Did he tithe his food? Therefore, the rabbis were the ones who were machmir and said, no, we can't. Midaraisa, we give him, Rashi said, Midaraisa kol adam neman. Every Jew has a cheskes kashrus that he gave maser. It's the rabbis who came along and muddied the waters and said, no, we can't rely. Vilma also vadai. And so, and if we allow it, then because then if you allow it with the mai, someone may confuse and say, you see that? They allowed food that was not mixed to go with the mixed food. I can do it on my field. I'm an Erlich, but I can do that. Then it'll come out that he will have mixed the two foods, right? The deconsecrated and the non-deconsecrated. And you're going to come out to eat chilul. So in other words, we have to go to a very extreme to protect Jews from possibly eating Masa Sheni, which has not been redeemed.
So, excuse me, Rabbi. When I looked in the back of the Gemara for the definition of Demai,
yeah,
says that he did give Truma, but we're not sure if he gave Meiser.
Okay, fine.
So when you carry that through, then you have this question of why do you believe part and not believe the other? And
well, okay. So think about it. Truma is something that you give to a Kohen. Even an Amoritz knows, whoa, Truma, that's not my domain. But if he has Masa Sheni is for you to eat. It's not to give away. So I can see where someone will say, nah, Truma, not touching that. That goes to the Kohen. But something that I can eat, I'm going to eat. I have to go to Yerushalayim and eat it. I'm going to go to Yerushalayim and eat it. Who knows the difference? In other words, you're more makel because it's your own. I'm not giving it away to anybody.
And there's another rationale also for Truma to be strict, more commonly observed. One is that it's got the inherent kedusha going to the Kohen, but then the other factor is that Truma has no set amount. So you could give. They're supposed to be normally a 40th, a 50th, or 60th, but it could even be much smaller than a 60th. It would still count as Truma. So you could give just a little bit and be done. Whereas Meiser, it's supposed to be a 10th. And so it really gets much more. You got to really measure how much you got and so on. And you don't have to redeem it. You could say, oh, maybe I'll go ahead and schlep it to Yerushalayim myself instead of redeeming it. So you got different options. And so there's all these different factors.
In other words, you'll be more lenient with that which you retain than that which you have to give away. Well, that's a good svara, certainly. So, but the whole idea is that when you don't have the obligation because you can't touch it, like you say, give a kvetch, whatever. And if you overlook that, you're still over an Issa D'Oraisa.
But he's supposed to, according to the definition, the field owner has to give it Meiser on the stuff left. It's not like Demai is another product that you can take up, becomes legitimate, but he has to then take Meiser on the what's called Demai, and therefore there's no more Demai and everything is okay. So why do we trust all this Demai to be?
Well, if I remember correctly, the issue with Demai is it's not when it's so much when it's your own, because you know whether you took your Meiser Sheni out or not.
Right.
It's that you're getting produce from, you go to the farmer's market and you get stuff, and it's not a from person who you know for sure would have taken care of everything. They didn't write out a statement saying everything's been taken care of. The assumption is they took Truma because everybody takes Truma, but maybe they took Meiser, maybe they didn't.
It's
Again,
hard to make an assumption that that's a legitimate product that has a question on it, and that becomes part of commerce. I mean, it would seem to me that the same pressure he has to go to the marketplace, somebody will ask him, "Did you take Truma?" He'll ask also a Meiser. It's the same it's part of the same question that he's being asked by a purchaser. Why do we let one go through and the other one we're assuming?
well, again,
It's
so
a hard
quoting,
question.
yeah, no, we started all of this by looking into the Mishnah in Bikurim, which, to your point, Jay, and from what you just said, Menashe, wants to equate Truma and Bikurim on one hand and Maser Sheni on the other hand.
Right.
Maser Sheni on the other hand. So inherently, you see from the Mishnah that there were two different approaches depending on what you were required to do. If you were required to give it away because it has a kedusha that obligates you to give it to a Kohen, there's one set of rules. If it's something that you can consume yourself, there is a leniency which you might interpret as, no one's really that makbid on Maser Sheni, I'm eating it. Who really makes the rule here? So inherently, the Mishnah is telling us, beware. The rules are so lenient with Maser Sheni, and then the question becomes, is it really lenient or not? But assuming, what about Maser Sheni? Yes, Jay, most people will say, oh, I'm giving Truma, I'm going to tithe, and I'll do it. But you have some people who will sort of fudge a little bit. And again, we're putting ourselves into the position of people at the time when you had to go to the Beis HaMikdash. Sure, they were all tzaddikim, megadolim, and all, but there is the possibility that you can. What? You don't need bottle b'meya, which certainly shows that there's a kedusha. It's simply bottle barov. Just toss it into a pot that has just slightly more chulin than it has kedushin, and all of a sudden you're good to go. If that's the case, let me cut corners a little bit. Did I redeem it? Yeah, I redeemed it, but this little last drop that fell down, it's okay. I'll just toss it into the mixture. Who will know? I mean, in other words, there is a mindset here that we're makel on Maser Sheni because it's all in-house. So I think that's the mindset we have to live with, and therefore we go off and say, so, well, wait a minute. So did you do it? Did you not do it? Can you be mitzdaref? Chizkiah says that you can be mitzdaref. We're not worried about deraisa d'Rabbanan. Others say no. That gives rise to this whole shaklamentaria, is because there are different views on how far you can go with bittul Maser Sheni. Imagine Chizkiah says, oh, the rabbis made a rule, but for Maser Sheni, we're going to vitiate the rule. It's not so critical. For Maser Sheni, we're going to say, I can take the mixture, I can include it on the coin, and therefore it's redeemed, and it's not nullified, and we're good to go. And someone will look at him and say, what are you talking about? How can you do that? So, in other words, it's because of the leniencies that we allow ourselves this discussion. We wouldn't even think about it if Maser Sheni wasn't just a little above chulin, right? It's not even Maser to the Levi. It's Maser Sheni. It's your food, So again, it's a mindset, Jay. I understand the question. I understand once you do it, you do it. But it seems from the Gemara that there was this drop off because of the drop-off in Kedusha from Truma and Bikurim on the one hand, and Masa Sheni on the other, that there was this drop-off in Kedusha, and therefore, okay, so people did not have the same respect and level of detail to be mechalel. Therefore, Chizkiah says, Davishesh Matirin, don't worry about it. Even if you have it fell into a mixture, don't worry about it. Okay. Now you can always be mevatel, but you don't have to be mevatel because there's matirin, because there's a way of legitimizing it in another way. Now the question here is a little bit different. The question is, okay, so went back and forth, and we said that you can't do it with a pruta, you can't do it with two prutas, 1.5 and a half. So we're going to use an isser. But you're raising the question quite candidly. So what if it's an isser? It's just a bigger coin with the same problem. The teretz is that in Chizkiah's eyes, the bigger coin allows for more legitimacy, and with a smaller coin, we're going to say, okay, all right, we're gonna put it on. Okay, we'll barely get it in, but it's okay. Somehow, the fact that it's a larger coin makes it a little bit easier, not for those who say you can't mix Deraisa and Rabbanan. That problem still exists. But for Chizkiah, he himself would say, okay, I don't have a problem because it's a large coin. There's plenty of room, and I don't worry about Deraisa and Rabbanan. So there isn't, I mean, Rashi doesn't even give us even an explanation of why it becomes more available because of the Isser. So okay, so I mean, again, there isn't the clear answer. We'll have to take a closer look. But l'chayra, according to Chizkiah, the fact that it's a larger coin somehow legitimizes in his eyes the fact that you can deconsecrate it onto the coin and then have to come on to bittul. So again, let's go a little bit further and then maybe look back. So the Gemara says, no, Isser doesn't solve the problem. Why? Vilma also la'asuya prutus. Why? Because if you allow an Isser, then again, to the uninitiated, they'll look at it and see, not that it's an Isser. He's bringing a coin, right? So what's the difference in people's mind between an Isser, let's say, and two prutos, which make up an Isser? So they'll say, you know what? I don't have an Isser. I happen to have two prutos. It's worth an Isser. Let me do it with two prutas. And I'll do what we said before. One pruta will have the maser, only maser midaraisa, right? And then the second one will have enough on it to include the maser cheni, which you've already fell into the mixture. But again, so we're back to the same square one. In other words, that if you use two, then so the chiddush is this. For some reason, not 100% clear from Rashi, but for some reason, Chizkiah has a bigger problem with putting the food that's in the mixture on a pruta where you can sort of, let's say, barely fit it on. And that's what he's talking about. There's enough room on the second pruta, and therefore we put it on, then the kashi is, but it's the Raisa de Rabbanan. And Chizkiah agrees with that. He says, in the case of two prutas, I'm going to agree. But in the case of an Isser, which is twice the amount of a pruta, but it's one coin, he finds a way to legitimize it, even though the same question arises. Because it's a good kasha. It's the Raisa de Rabbanan. Why should we allow it? So I don't clearly have an answer of what makes the Isser better than two prutas. But the chashash is, if you use an Isser, the Hamon Am, many people will say, if I can use an Isser and two prutas make an Isser, let me use two prutas. Again, it's the same concept of demai and vadai. If I could do it with demai, which is okay, it's suffix, but it's clean, it's the deraisa, so to speak, then I can use the regular deraisa. The same confusion that exists by demai exists by shtei prutas and doesn't exist by an iser, but we're worried that someone will say, if it's an iser, let me use two prutas instead of an iser. Again, it's confusing. It's confusing. Why should an iser be better? Why should an
Well,
iser be better? Because it's one coin as opposed to two. Yeah, Jay.
You have two prutas, so do you have to designate which one you're adding it to?
Yeah, you do. In other words, they take the first pruta and say, push this aside, this is full of deraisa.
Right.
Not touching that pruta. Now I have a second pruta. That pruta only has half a pruta worth of deraisa. I've got a half a pruta of unencumbered value. What can I do with that half pruta? Normally, I would say nothing and go to your shalayim. But then all of a sudden, the guy in the field says, Rabbi Yankel, I just found another half a pruta worth of food that has to be made full in order to go to Yerushalayim. He says, no problem. I have this pruta. The pruta has rule. Let's put it on the pruta. Says the Gemara, it's the Raisa, the Rabbanan, you can't do it. But Yale asked this kasha before. So why is it better one than two? And why is it better two than an Isser? If it's good for one and it's good for two, it should be good for an Isser. And that's really the question. Chizkiah allows it because, and again, I don't know if it's Marakayan, I'm not, it's not 100% clear. Rashi doesn't define it for us.
There's a big difference. One is visibly noticeable that you're taking the two prutas and do exactly what you just said. So that's an activity that is visually different. When you have the Isser, there's no special activity, you just say it. I mean, it's a different process if you were videotaping the two things. They don't look the same. Now, does that mean that somebody could make a mistake?
Yeah.
About the two prutos rather than the Isser, you're not going to make a mistake. I don't know. I can't figure it out either.
Yeah. I mean, if Chizkiah does not abide by the rule that you can't mix the Raisa and the Rabbanan, then that rule should apply all the way down from an Isser to Shtei Prutas to one Pruta. So there is a disharmony here in understanding what Chizkiah will allow, what Chizkiah will not allow. I haven't seen any of the other Mefarshim talk about it, and so we took it at face value that the Gemara is saying that because of the Deraisa Rabbanan, you can't do it.
How much earlier the Chizkiah lived compared to the Rabbanan who were involved in this question?
No, so again, Chizkiah probably lived at the end of the Tanoic period. I could look up the exact time, and he was well respected, and his rule, obviously, they looked to him because he had the gravitas, just like other Tanoim, to make this rule. But it was around the time in the transition between the Tanoim and the Amoraim, again, the later in time became more of the appropriate halachic response. So they looked to Chizkiah and say, "Oh, Chizkiah has a tremendous chiddush. No one came up with this before. Davar sheyesh lo matirin. This is a new concept, and it makes sense. If you could do matirin, you can't do bittul. No one talked about that before. So because of that, that became sort of the standard bearer of going forward. And now, but we had a Meferish Brisa that says that you can be mevatel. So how does that Brisa square with Chizkiah? That's why we have this back and forth. Is what did Chizkiah mean? But is there really a chiddush? And so in a way, we're saying that it's safer to take the food that's in the mixture and allow bittul, which will clearly make that masa sheni chulin. It'll make it chulin because it's bottle. In a way, that's safer because then there's no chashash of eating masa sheni because it's mevatel. Right? So that's a given that bittul is easy. Chizkiah comes to say, I don't go with easy because you can only go with easy when it's the lowest common denominator and there's no other choice. But if you have another choice, don't go with easy. Don't go with bittul. And that other choice is matirin.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't know. I mean, it's still a little bit of a kasha. And again, I hadn't seen anything that gave rise to understanding this chilik. So the question is a good question. At the end of the day, what do we do? What do we do when it comes to deconsecrating on a coin, and you have something left over on the coin? Do you go with the coin, or do you go with bittul? Do you go with the safer of the two, which is bittul, which is the lowest common denominator, or do we say no? We don't want to go to the lowest common denominator. We want to go a little bit up the chain and go to matirin. And therein lies the machlokes between Chizkiah and the other Tanoim and all the Rabbanan who came in that time, is that they feel that Chizkiah has stretched the band a little bit too far and has allowed. What's the problem? The problem is that if you hold like Chizkiah, fine. But if you're on the fence, then you may be eating masa sheni, which is an isser. So why not go with the sure thing? Go with bittul, and you have no havamina that you're not eating masa sheni. But Chizkiah says no. Bittul, okay, bittul is a safe haven, but you can only come to bittul when you have no other resort. If you have a resort to another avenue like matirin, then according to Chizkiah, bittul won't help. So we're back to square one because bittul isn't a safe haven for everybody. It's a safe haven, so to speak, when that's the only recourse. But if there's recourse to other than bittul, Chizkiah is saying, if you're mevatel, you're over a lav. That's the problem. If you're mevatel, you're over a lav because you shouldn't have been mevatel because you could have been matir.
Right.
Therein lies the real dilemma.
That's his biggest argument, really.
What's that?
That's his largest argument, to say, don't do it that way.
That's right. That's exactly right. And that's the argument. Again, I'll take another. I don't see anything that gives me any further understanding of, again, on the coinage, why Isser is better than two prutas and two prutas is better than one pruta, on the question of deraisa d'Rabbanan. I just don't see it. But look, we're going to go into next week. We're going to take one more crack at this. Actually, the next Gemara departs from this discussion into something else having to do with the same general topic. So we're kind of right at the end of the discussion here as to whether or not you can redeem on a coin or you have to be mevatel. So
They also had much more.
Yeah, go ahead.
They also had much more time to discuss this than a 1 hour shiur.
No, exactly. I mean, that's the beauty of what we're doing is that, we can stand on this one point and try to delve into it as much as we can. But the kasha was a good one from the very beginning that Yale asked, because, once you ask the kasha doesn't go away. The kasha goes all the way down. It just somehow the havamina was that 2 coins is better than 1, and an isser is better than 2 coins. At the end of the day, the answer is no, it's not better. We walk away from this knowing that an isser, 2 prutas, 1 pruta, it's all the same. Now, so the question is, okay, so what's the havamina? What's the havamina? Why did we think that 2 coins is better than 1 and the isser better than 2? And again, it's not quite clear why that was the havamina. But again, we're going to depart into a different area next week, so I will take one more close look and see what other sources beforehand there are.
Psychologically, it's different. Because you had to
Psychologically,
do-
yeah, no,
you had to do
psychologically,
two events,
yeah,
even if you're doing it alone, you had to do two things rather than one thing.
yeah. Yeah, no, and again, the answer to an Isser is Maris Ayin, that you will think that if you can do it on Isser, why not do it on two Prutas, which is the equivalent of an Isser? So to the uninitiated, an Isser is no bigger, you know, as I say, no bigger legitimate candidate than having two Prutas, which is the same value. So if we're
Right.
placing it on value, what difference does it make? Your point psychologically, it's one coin versus two, but
One
then
event.
again,
Yeah.
what was the Havamina of two Prutas versus one Pruta? Again, we can go back and forth on all these shilas, but the end result is that Chizkiah is lishitaso. Chizkiah really holds that davar sheyesh lo matirin trumps bittul, and therefore wherever you have matirin, you have to use matirin. And the Mishnah, which stated that you can be mevatel with, that's a Meferish Mishnah. It says that you can be mevatel, Masa Sheni. That's what it says. It's a Bryce, but it's like a Mishnah. So that Mishnah stands. That Mishnah stands. It says that Masa Sheni can be mevatel. So again, now we go back and forth. Do we carve out exceptions? So like everything else, the Gemara leaves us hanging and doesn't always give us a definitive answer. That's what the beauty of the Gemara is. It's left to us to try to figure out underlying. And I wish there was more meat here to be able to give us an understanding. So look, we'll take another look. It's a Shem, and then we're going to pick up next week from the very bottom of the Gimel Aleph, where we now continue our discussion, but not on this direct subject anymore. So it's a Shem. Next week we'll pick up. All right.